ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into Part 7 of the series. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. Izuku began packing his meager belongings. He didn't have much that fit into 3 cardboard boxes. He would have to buy more things for the new dorms. Like the shoes, he exploded in the rush to save Koda and Toru. With an annoyed sigh, he put on the old pair of shoes he had and went out to buy a new pair. A few days later, Izuku walked through the gates of the school and stood in front of the new dorms. Most of his classmates were already there and waiting. Toru skipped over to him and latched onto his arm. She gave him a beaming smile, and Izuku returned it. "You would never believe how much I had to argue for my parents to let me stay at UA." She began and led Izuku to their gang of friends. "Makes sense, if I had a kid coming here, I would have pulled them out," Izuku argued. "But I'm glad you succeeded in talking them in. What's this about a kid?" "Toru. Before wedlock." "For shame," Mina teased. Izuku reddened at the idea, but didn't push away the thought of having a child with Toru. He reddened even more at the realization. "Huh, he looks like a strawberry." Denki laughed. "I'm sure Toru is just as bad, but she's cheating with her quirk." Denki turned to the invisible girl and was blinded by a bright light. "My eyes." "Huh." Hanta laughed and pointed. Kyuka shook her head at all of them. "I swear we are going to end up killing one another. Denki will be first, of course." The chatter died down, and Izuku turned to see why. Bakugo and Aizawa walked to the group together. Bakugo looked calm, but the tension in his shoulders showed otherwise. The class was visibly unsure of what to think of their classmate, and the two noticed. Aizawa stopped and scanned them. "Everyone is here, good. Let's get the tour over with already." Aizawa walked ahead and through the doors. Izuku saw Kirishima try to make conversation with Bakugo, but it was forced on the redhead's end. The rest of the class was never close to Bakugo, and what Izuku told them about him made it worse. Currently, Bakugo and Kirishima were separated from everyone, and Kirishima seems to be losing his ambition to stay close to the bomber. The tour wasn't very exciting, but it was new for everyone to see. Soon, Aizawa left, and everyone went to their rooms to get settled in. Izuku was done in a couple of hours and headed down to eat. He was slightly uncomfortable sharing space with others since Izuku had been alone for over 5 years at least. He found bread, sandwich meat, and cheese. With that, he settled in for his meal. Some of his classmates had the same idea and began to scout out the kitchen for food. "Ah, Midoriya, could I grab the bread from you?" Uraraka asked with a small smile. Izuku nodded and slid the bread over to her. He absent-mindedly watched her make a peanut and jelly sandwich with little of each. "You ever try adding honey to it?" Izuku tried to converse. Uraraka gave a bright smile. "Mom sometimes made it like that, but she trailed off. Honey is expensive." Izuku nodded. He recalled trying it once and loving it, but the budget for extra things like that was scarce. Uraraka looked up at that and nodded. "Your family was tight on money too?" She went back to her sandwich. "Something like that." Izuku shrugged noncommittally. He got up to walk away and wander around when she called out. Midoriya, I just wanted to let you know that I don't care that you were quirkless." "Yeah," she finished sheepishly. Izuku turned around to see the honesty, and that warmed his chest. "Thanks, Uraraka. That means a lot to me." He gave her a grateful smile. "Of course." She beamed and munched on her PB&J sandwich. Denki finished and met Izuku in the common room. "Yo, finished already?" He plopped next to Izuku on the couch. Comfy. I don't have much." Izuku shrugged. Denki looked at his friend in worry. "Are you alright? You drop things like that every once in a while." Izuku opened his mouth to brush it off, but closed it. "Yeah, there's something I should probably tell you guys. Maybe a while ago." He saw more worry show on Denki's face. "Nothing urgent, just another thing is all." He tried to reassure him with little success. "Alright." Denki nodded, but still was apprehensive. Toru interrupted them by jumping over the backrest and almost landing on Izuku. "What you guys talking about?" She smiled up at Izuku. "I'll tell you later." Izuku smiled and hugged Toru. "Making me jealous over here," Denki grumbled. They ignored him and spent the rest of the day hanging out in their new environment. Denki and Hanta hooked up their gaming systems for the class and fought over games. Most of the class soon joined them in the common room to watch and participate in the gaming tournament. Izuku sat next to Toru the whole time, and she leaned into his shoulder. Overall, it was a pleasant time. Before bed, Denki stopped the rest of the gang and motioned to Izuku. All right. Izuku got up and made them follow him into his room. Izuku welcomed them in without any hesitation. Is something the matter? Toru asked worriedly. Not really. Everyone stood around and waited. Izuku sighed and rubbed his shoulder. You all know about how I was treated and all that. Well, my mother was the opposite and left me to deal with it all alone. To get it out, I haven't seen her in over a year and haven't spoken to her in more. What? Mina exclaimed in horror. And after the internships, I found out she moved out of the apartment and paid it for the next 3 years. He added. Izuku, Toru said sadly and tightly hugged him. Why didn't you say anything? She sobbed into his chest. It's not like it would have changed anything. It's just another thing I had to deal with. Izuku shrugged with his arms around Toru. Denki got close and pulled Izuku's shirt up to show his stomach. You're not starving or anything, right? He poked. Izuku's cheeks reddened, and he batted Denki's hand away. No, Inko deposits money into an account for necessities. That's why you knew how to cook so well. Mina chuckled weakly. Man, that blows, Hyuka said sadly. I'm guessing Yue knows since they went to everyone's house for the dorms. Yeah, Aizawa and All Might came. And your dad? Not around? Hanta asked tentatively. Izuku shrugged again. Never met him. Maybe she ran off to find him. He said bitterly. Toru squeezed tighter to reassure him. It helped. Is there anything else that we should know? You know, just to clear the plate? Denki asked and got a mild glare from Hyuka. Izuku thought for a moment. Not that I can recall. The gang stayed for a bit longer in Izuku's room. Mina was the one who broke the silence. Let's have a sleepover. Izuku has missed out, and we don't have school until Monday. She proposed. Toru jumped on the idea. Yeah, that's a great idea. Denki and Hanta both shrugged and nodded. Everyone looked at Hyuka. Well, I can't say no now. Everyone gave a quiet cheer, and they filed out of Izuku's room to get supplies. While Izuku wasn't opposed, it would have been considerate of them to ask what he thought. That didn't stop the warm smile that showed on his face. He stayed there for a bit and wondered what he should do to prepare. He didn't know what people did at sleepovers or what they would need. He was brought out of his thoughts when Denki burst in with his arms full of stuff. Izuku rushed over to help him. Soon, the rest of the gang arrived with similarly filled arms, Mina's with more snacks than anything else. They made a large blanket and pillow pile that everyone sat upon. Hanta set up the small TV he brought. Mina passed snacks around and fought Toru when they wanted the same. Snack. Hyuka caught Izuku's unsure nature. You'll enjoy it, just relax. She reassured him. Izuku nodded tentatively. Have you had sleepovers? Only a few times and way long ago. They usually go about the same each time. She chuckled. Everyone got comfortable, and Hanta put on a comedy show. Toru snuck under Izuku's arm and snuggled in with a bag of gummy worms. Mina pouted at her lost snack and resigned herself to gummy bears. Izuku looked around at his friends getting under blankets and laughing at the bad jokes on the TV. He looked down at Toru leaning on his chest and felt her giggles. Izuku felt ever grateful that he made friends with the people around him. He held Toru and felt himself relax in his new possible home. Izuku was the first one awake, and he was confused at waking up in an unfamiliar place. He sensed the area around him with his quirk and remembered where he was. He looked around at the sleeping forms of his friends splayed around his room. Denki was curled up with his blanket, half off his body at the feet of everyone else. Hyuka's leg was on Denki's chest, and her arm was under Hanta, who was sleeping face down. Mina was spread eagle and half of her body was draped over Hanta and her legs over Hyuka. Drool dribbled down her cheek to soak the back of Hanta's shirt. Izuku looked at Toru and felt heat rush his face and body. She was curled around his arm and her back was pressed tightly to his chest. Izuku's other arm was hugging her from behind, and his legs were wrapped around hers. He was stuck and couldn't move unless he woke her and possibly everyone else. Without much else to do, Izuku relaxed again and slowly dozed off to the smell of Toru's shampoo. Mina, I think that's enough photos. Hyuka whispered, yelled at the pink girl. They look so cute though. Mina quietly squealed with joy. Look at Izuku's face, he looks so relaxed. He always looks at least a bit tense, and like looking over his shoulder. Hanta noted, and the others agreed. What should we do? Slip out. Wake them. Guys, I know it would be pretty obvious to see if Izuku woke, but how do we know if Toru is awake or not? Dinky asked. The four zeroed in on where Toru's face should be, and they heard a quiet squeak. Mina slapped her hand over her mouth to keep quiet as she held in the sound of laughter. Toru, you little seductress you. Mina squealed. I can't get out without waking him, she said quietly as she could. Do you want to get out? Kyuka smirked. They heard Toru grumble, and her clothes shifted as everyone awake chuckled. Izuku began to stir awake, and the others quickly acted like they were waking up for the first time. Izuku opened his eyes and looked around at everyone in completely different positions than they were earlier. He caught the concealed smirk of Mina's and immediately realized they all saw him. His face burned at being caught in such a situation, and the rest of his body got hot too when he sensed Toru trying her best to act asleep as well. Good morning everyone, Dinky said with the most unconvincing yawn. Yeah, he's not buying it, Kyuka said. Izuku began to pull away from his hold on Toru when he felt her hold tight to his arm and locked her legs to prevent him from moving for a moment longer, and then she let go and got up with him. Toru's hair was sticking up everywhere as she turned to Izuku's burning face. She gave him a warm smile and pecked his cheek. The best sleep I've had, she whispered to him. Izuku's face burned even hotter, and he tried to hide away his face from the others who began to laugh at his embarrassment. Toru helped calm him down by hugging him from behind and giggling softly as everyone else began to stretch and wake properly. Once Izuku was sufficiently calmed down, everyone headed downstairs to find breakfast. They left the mess in Izuku's room for later. The rest of the weekend passed with the gang of friends hanging around together most of the time. Sometimes they split apart to enjoy their time alone, but the majority was spent doing something everyone could enjoy. Soon, Monday morning came, and everyone dragged their feet to class. I don't wanna. Mina whined for the nth time that morning as they walked through the doors of the classroom. Me neither, Dinky whined next to her. Once everyone sat down, Aizawa came through the door a few moments later. Go get changed. And he walked out. Izuku rolled his eyes at the man, but did as he was told. Everyone met up in a concrete gym with a few teachers behind Aizawa. He explained what they missed out on since the attack on the camp cut their time short. Izuku thought about super moves he could make, but realized most of his moves are super moves. Anytime he absorbs or releases a large amount of energy of any kind changes the battlefield. The combination of absorbing light and sound changes the environment to his advantage since he could still see with his sixth sense. Thermal absorption to the maximum would freeze anything in the immediate vicinity while adding to his core. Those were the two he immediately thought of, and they were game changers. Aizawa was done speaking, and everyone began to split off to make super moves. His gang of friends also split off to practice the moves that they already had, thanks to Izuku. He was still curious about Toru and her hidden super move, but he wouldn't pry. Young Midoriya, you seem lost. Do you need any help thinking up any super moves? All Might approached him tentatively. Izuku eyed the man for a moment. Your smashes, they are super moves, right? All Might was a bit surprised that the boy spoke to him without any venom in his tone and was more than happy to help. Yes, even though I use them frequently, they are super moves. Izuku nodded. Then, I have plenty of super moves. I did ask Hatsum for some support items. I'll go see if she is done. Izuku turned to leave. Where are you going? Aizawa asked. Shouldn't you be working like the others? He said he had plenty of super moves. All Might shrugged. You're not going anywhere until you show me 3. Izuku rolled his eyes and glared at the man. He was far enough away so they didn't get caught in the crossfire. The immediate area turned into the coldest part of the planet without Izuku moving a muscle and continued to stare at the underground hero. Absolute Zero. He said the name he made up long ago. Next, he raised his hand, and a bead of pure thermal energy coalesced in his palm. It turned from bright white to blue. His eyes turned to All Might, and the faint burn scars on his forearms from the same super move he made on the spot. Nuclear immolation. Finally, the bead disappeared, and the area turned into a dome of the void, and the sounds stopped working. Izuku could still see and moved quickly behind a tense Aizawa. He released his quirk and sound came again. Void domain. Aizawa turned in a flash to stare at the boy. Izuku stared back for a moment and turned to head to the support department. The two watched Izuku walk out of the room. They both were wary of Midoriya and his mental stability. One bad day, and Aizawa wasn't sure if he could contain him. Maybe if he got the jump on Midoriya, but he was doubtful. He turned to watch the rest of his class, and saw that the group of friends belonging to Midoriya all had a head start with super moves. Mina was covered in an acid suit and wafted waves of white mist that ate away at the concrete pillars before her. Kaminari was moving faster than a normal person should. Zero had multiple copies of ectoplasm tied together with rapid movements. Gyro was focusing on sending narrowed sound waves that shook the earth. And Hagakure had burnt targets from light beams similar to Aoyama's quirk. Izuku walked to the metal door and opened it. He looked around and found the pink mechanic with a welding hood on and focused on an invention. Izuku walked over to her and absorbed the light around his face to see what she was welding. He was mildly surprised about the amount of light energy he was absorbing, but focused on what she was working on and waited. He had no clue what she carefully worked on, but it was interesting. He could sense power loader eye him, but paid no mind to the teacher. Hatsum finished and took off the hood and handed it to Izuku. He took it without hesitation and spoke. Hatsum, you finished what I asked? MHM. She turned from her work to see who was beside her. Flux. I have. Come and see what you think. She beamed and dragged Izuku over to the corner. Let me present you with a miniature nuclear reactor. She placed her hands on her hips proudly. Izuku grinned in delight and sensed the device the size of a small refrigerator. He could sense the small amount of nuclear material inside with a lot of energy contained in the material. But the best part was the electric energy contained and waiting to be used. He saw a screen seeing it green and turned to the still grinning girl. How much energy can I get from this? A buttload. It's held in standby mode for now until it's ready to use. Otherwise, if it's on all the time, it could Hatsum made an explosion with her hands. More of a meltdown, but you get the idea. That makes sense. How does it work? Hatsum beamed and uncovered 2 copper rods. Firmly grasp it. Izuku did so and waited. She tapped on the screen and the machine thrummed to life. How much can you absorb at a time? She asked curiously. As much as I need. Izuku smiled excitedly. Hatsum nodded calmly. Then, full power. She yelled in delight, and they heard power loader yelp in panic and begin to rush over. Izuku felt a small trickle and then a torrent of electricity shoot up the copper rods. His smile could only be described as unhinged as bolts of electricity tried to escape but was sucked into his arms. When the rods began to heat up at the amount of energy coursing through them, he absorbed the heat. When the reactor began to leak particles of radiation, he diverted their course to himself and took them in gladly. When the cooling system burned away, he took up the job himself. Bit by bit, the energy contained in the nuclear core was drained away and converted into electricity at a staggering rate that caused the machine to begin to fall apart. Shut it down. Power loader yelled. Hatsum rushed to do so, but the screen sparked and shut down. That's bad. Flux. Shut it off if you can. If not, well, run. She shrugged. Izuku gave out a pained sigh and reluctantly absorbed the nuclear core and any energy that was contained in the machine. The nuclear reactor came to a dead stop and Izuku sighed. He checked inside his core and his sigh turned into a joyful laugh. That's a lot of energy. He turned to Hatsum and gave her a thumbs up. Great job. Although, I think causing it to melt down wasn't part of the design. No, it wasn't. Full power caused it to degrade much faster than predicted. Hatsum began to tear it apart when Power Loader ran up to her in a hazmat suit and pulled her away and checked the area with a Geiger counter. It never made a sound. Hatsum and Izuku watched him, and then Izuku turned to her. Got any nuclear I can absorb? She beamed and pulled out a cardboard box and pointed at it for him. He didn't even look inside, and it was drained of nuclear energy. I think my trip here was a success. I look forward to seeing what else you make. Izuku left his number for her. She picked it up and stared at the numbers. What's this? A code? My phone number, in case you need me to absorb any additional energy, or if you make something that I could use. Hatsum beamed and stuck her hand out. Happy doing business. Izuku took it and shook her greasy hand. Class 1A got off the bus in front of the large building with many other students from other schools doing the same. They grouped up as Izuku watched everyone else from the other schools to gauge their capabilities. It was somewhat difficult, but quirks affected the person's personality frequently enough to use it as a way to guess their quirks. Granted, it's not perfect, but it's a good way to get started on his possible opponents. One thing he noticed from just about every school was that they all eyed UA more than the others. People watching? Toru came up to his side. Something like that. He murmured, "Ah, you're trying to tear them apart." Toru realized. Izuku looked over at her and gave her a warm smile. She beamed back. "Am I right or am I right?" Izuku chuckled and nodded. "I was trying to guess their quirks and see where they stood. Since they don't have something similar like the sports festival, it's hard to tell." He trailed off and hummed. "What?" Toru poked at his cheek. He swatted her hand away with a smile. He motioned her to follow and went to Yaoruzo. "They know our quirks and some of our abilities." He nodded to the other schools. What do you mean?" Yaoruzo was thrown off by the usually standoffish boy suddenly talking to her and initiating a dialogue. What would you do if your possible opponent's quirks were put on live TV for everyone to see? He posed the question to her. "I would watch, memorize, and develop counters to the ones I could counter." She answered and shook her head in confusion. She looked at where the powerful boy looked and cursed softly in realization. "The sports festival. Wait, everyone knows our quirks? That's bogus." Thinkiumed. The rest of the class heard the conversation and also complained about it. Aizawa sauntered up and heard them. "Good, you all realized what it means to be put in the public eye. It would have been nice to know ahead of time." Mina crossed her arms at him. "You all will have to learn on your own." "Yeah, too bad we don't go to school to learn these kinds of stuff," Izuku said sarcastically. Aizawa shot a glare at the boy but was cut off from shooting back by a voice he didn't want to hear. "Yo, Eraserhead, let's get married." A foam green-haired hero threw her arm around the tired man. "Didn't your profile on him say that he was already married?" Mina asked Izuku. Both heroes' attention was snapped to what the pink girl said. Aizawa's eyes turned to the green-haired boy. "Profile?" he questioned. "You're not special. I have one on everyone." Izuku shrugged and turned to the large mass of thermal energy walking up to them. "You're an odd one, aren't you?" Miss Joke tried to lighten the tense mood between the student and the teacher. She, of course, knew of the winner of the sports festival and his overwhelming power and his humiliation of the second-place winner. "I came to introduce my class from Ketsubutsu Academy. Hello. Nice to meet you all. I'm Yoshindo." He reached for a handshake and Izuku stared at it. He took the hand and shook it. "Midoriya," he said simply. "I'm sure you already knew that. Self-centered one, huh?" Miss Joke elbowed Eraserhead, but he was watching the interaction carefully, which caused her some trepidation. "He's not. Dangerous, is he?" "Very," Aizawa responded and left it at that. "What do you mean?" Yoshindo asked quizzically. "Everyone here watched the sports festival, and anyone worth their weight would have analyzed every frame for our quirks to have an edge on us," Izuku said. "At least, that's what I would have done." He shrugged. "Making friends, are we?" Denki and Hanta sauntered up next to Izuku. "No, just gauging our competitors," Izuku said, and turned away. "Makes sense." Hanta nodded and turned with Izuku without waiting. Denki shot finger guns and winked at the blonde girl next to Yo and walked backward for a few steps before tripping and quickly righting himself. Yoshindo's face fell as they walked away, and he also turned away from UA. He's someone to keep an eye out for. Everyone went to change into their hero suits after the interaction between Izuku and Ketsubutsu Academy. They all grouped up again and headed to the large gathering room filled with over 1,000 other students hoping to get their provisional licenses. A man walked onto the stage and to the podium for the Hero Commission. He sounded even more tired than Aizawa, if that was even possible. He explained the rules of the exam and how many would be allowed to pass. There was an uproar at the limited slots, but that didn't discourage Izuku or his gang of friends. After putting on the targets on their bodies, every school split off to their desired terrain. Todoroki split off immediately became of his quirk effectiveness with friendly fire. Izuku wanted to do the same, but his gang of friends stopped him from running off. Bakugo also looked like he wanted to go off on his own, but Kirishima held him back from leaving the group. Ever since Bakugo had returned from his capture from the League of Villains, he had been quiet and distant while Kirishima tried to bring him back to how things used to be before everyone had learned what Bakugo had done. Bakugo had asked Kirishima directly one day about the strange behavior of everyone, and the redhead explained what Izuku had told them. Kirishima had tried to play it off like it was no big deal, but Bakugo's silence was enough for Kirishima to figure out it was just as bad as Izuku had said. Ever since Kirishima had tried to get Bakugo to be more friendly, but it only has gone so far. What's the plan, boss? Hanta asked in his gruff voice reserved for Izuku. Izuku looked around at the rocky field. We're going to get jumped as soon as this starts. The best thing to do is jump them back in return. All right, that sounds good. Who does what? Or are we on the chaos train today? Mina asked. It's going to be hard to predict what will be thrown at us with so many variables. I say just stay together and work together as best we can. Izuku shrugged. Solid enough for me. Denki nodded. The buzzer went off, and immediately a rush of students began to throw ball and their quirks at UA. Izuku and Toru flashed them with a bright light that blinded many of them as Hanta began to tie some of them up and reel them in for a tag-out. Denki and Mina shot their quirks out to slow the tide of projectiles. Hyuka had her earlobes plugged into the ground for scouting and heard a voice. Izuku, it's that one guy you were talking to earlier. Hyuka shouted out a warning. Izuku leapt forward and burned Mini Ball into nothing as he caught the smirk shot in his direction by Shindo as he slammed his hands down on the ground. Izuku sensed the massive kinetic energy surging everywhere, and Izuku smirked back behind his mask. He absorbed it all, and the smile on Shindo's face fell, and confusion replaced it. He looked to Izuku, and he shook his head and slowly placed one hand on the earth. The ground shattered, and the whole arena shook at the impact of Izuku's display. The earth erupted beneath everyone's feet, and they were thrown off balance. What Shindo tried to do was a pale imitation of what Izuku showed. Uno reverse, beach. Denki cackled. Izuku had his target and dashed forward to Shindo, who was just now recovering. He was shocked at the power the student of UA had displayed. He looked up to see the green eyes of the said student staring at him from above. He tried to get up and attack, but a wave of electricity washed over in every direction, stunning them and rendering them immobile. Shindo tried to use his quirk, but it was made useless by Izuku's presence. Any vibrations were nullified and the targets on his body were tagged, and he was out. A few more battles ensued between those who remained on their feet and Izuku's class. A few tried to take Izuku down with their quirks or combat skills, but between absorbing every strike and him being able to immolate anything that tried to capture him, it was no use. A girl with ice armor charged at him with a war cry, but the ice on her body melted away under an aura of intense heat and then batted away with a kinetic blast. Two others tried to trap him by telekinesis and get him off the ground, but a void domain cut their line of sight of their quirks, and they were disoriented by the sudden attack, losing their concentration. Two lightning bolts took them down, and Izuku moved forward. The rest of Izuku's gang fared well with their teamwork. Hanta was ideal for capturing others, and Denki to stun them. The girls acted in supporting roles by defending themselves from others trying to get close by using mists of acid, beams of light, and sound waves. Soon, they all passed, and were on their way to the next phase. Toru and the other four walked into the waiting area to see Izuku already seated and waited for them. You left us. Toru pointed an accusatory finger his way. No, I didn't. I helped break the ambush and just got here before you guys. He explained. Plus, you all can handle yourselves. Hear that? The boss thinks we are capable. Hanta said smugly. That's fair. Denki shrugged and went to the snack table with Mina on his heels. Toru plopped next to him and leaned on his shoulder until he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. What do you think the next phase is? Hyuka caught a water Denki tossed her and sat across from the two. Izuku hummed in thought. We already did fighting with the addition to trim the numbers down. Now, I'm guessing it has something to do with rescue or helping civilians in some way. Or maybe we all have to work together to perform a raid. I'm not entirely sure. 5 whole schmeckles that it's a rescue thing. Denki said to the group with his arms full of snacks for the table. The F is a schmeckle? Make it 10 and you got yourself a deal. Mina and Hyuka said at the same time. After some time, the rest of their class joined everyone else in the waiting room. They mostly stayed in groups, but not all together. The one that was mostly alone was Bakugo with Kirishima nearby him. More and more hero hopefuls joined the rest in the waiting room for a while longer. Izuku people watched to see who would pass to the second phase. A few people caught his eye, but mostly one tall boy with a Shiketsu high school uniform often eyed Todoroki from across the room. Soon the last person to pass walked into the room, and the TV in the room turned on. The last slot has been filled, and the second phase will start soon. There was an aerial view of the terrain they were just in. Everyone watched as those who didn't pass were collected and removed from the area. The second phase will consist of disaster rescue. Multiple explosions rocked the area and leveling everything into rubble. There were cries of alarm, and then the screens such to show people in blue t-shirts covering themselves in fake BLD. Your objective is to rescue civilians from the aftermath. You owe me 10 schmeckles. Dinky pointed with a laugh at Mina. The room's wall opened out, and the second phase started. Yayaruzo took charge immediately. All right, we need to set up a triage zone. Immediately for the civilians. Anyone with scouting abilities focuses on finding trapped people. Earjack, Tentacle, Anima, and Flux would be ideal. Everyone else helps with getting them out safely. Who put you in charge? Another test taker asked hotly. Who cares who's in charge? This phase is a team effort. Your name gets written down on the participation trophy like everyone else. Izuku said loudly enough for everyone to hear as he began to look for people under the rubble. Here, got two. He pointed down. Everyone jumped into action and spread apart. Sato and Mina worked together to melt and toss rubble out of the way to get two mostly unharmed civilians to the triage zone. Izuku didn't stick around and kept scanning with his sixth sense to find thermal signatures buried or hidden. He called out multiple times to indicate where people were and sometimes helped others get people to safety. Hello, I'm Flux. Are you hurt anywhere? Izuku knelt by a crying woman whose legs were trapped by rebar and concrete. My leg, it hurts. She could shift it somewhat, but couldn't get out. Izuku looked around the leg to see how safe it would be for him to cut her out. All right, I'll get you out in a moment. What's your name? He asked as he heated his hand to the point it was glowing. He absorbed the excess heat radiating to avoid hurting the woman and cut through the rebar like wet paper. Akio, please hurry. She whined. Just a moment, he said calmly. The last bar holding her leg was released, and Izuku was able to lift the block to get her out. He saw another test taker looking around and called out. Here, take Akio to the triage zone. The teen ran over and gently picked her up. Before he left, Akio shot Izuku a thumbs up. He felt pride at that and kept going to search for civilians. He ran into his classmates and helped where he could, but his main focus was on finding people inside of getting them to the triage zone or getting them out. Izuku hesitated when there was an explosion in the area. He let out a sigh of relief when the overseer of the exam said it was part of the test and that a villain came back. Izuku debates between helping the civilians and going and fighting. He saw a few go off to fight, including Todoroki, so he chose to stay for a bit longer to help civilians. He heard the battle go on as Izuku pointed out hidden people. Flux, this is Creati. Help with the villain, we got it here. Izuku heard over his earpiece everyone got at the start of the phase. Izuku looked over to where the sounds of battle quieted down and the erratic flames shooting into the air. He frowned at the display and began to run with bursts of kinetic energy. Once he was clear from hurting anyone, he blasted off with kinetic energy into the air to gain an aerial view of what was happening. He saw Todoroki and that boy that was glaring at him in the waiting room collapse by Gang Orca's Quirk. Once he found his target, he aimed himself at him and rocketed forward. He saw his sidekicks and pulled the RBB ball bearings and shot them at the groups. Many of them went down at the scattered shots. Gang Orca heard the cries of pain and looked behind him to see the plumes of dust from the impacts of the projectiles. He looked up to see where they came from just in time to see a masked boy coming straight at him. He crossed his arms to block and then felt the small touch before being catapulted back at speed. He tumbled in the air until he bounced off the ground to a stop. He groaned in pain at the hard landing and got up to see who hit him. Izuku took off the jacket and tossed it next to Todoroki's prone form. He was aware of Gang Orca's Quirk and its effects, so he wasn't worried about the ones that were immobilized by it. He was also aware of his weaknesses and fighting style. Gang Orca met his eyes, and Izuku began walking forward to the villain that was attacking. Surrender, Izuku called out. You puny hero, you dare? Gang Orca said in imperialistic tone. That was a good strike. Too bad that's all you'll manage to get. He said in his normal tone. He screeched, launching a subsonic wave at Izuku to stun him. Izuku kept walking forward, and the sound wave was absorbed into his core without an issue. Kugo Sakamata, Quirk, or Sinus. Enhanced strength, speed, and durability with the added ability to launch subsonic attacks to stun opponents. Most effective underwater, even deadly. Weak to heat and dehydrated. You are one of my most liked heroes. Izuku never stopped walking forward as he spoke. That's pretty impressive, but can you back it up? Gang Orca was a bit unnerved at his profile being said out loud by the boy before him. I can. Now surrender. The breathes Izuku wore burst into flames, leaving him in his black suit underneath. The stone under his feet began to warp and melt. An intense heat washed out from him in every direction. Everyone in the facility felt the temperature rise. Cement blobs shot at Izuku, but they washed over his body in liquid glassy substances. Gang Orca stepped back at the impossible heat, but Izuku didn't stop his advancement. The earth under his feet glowed hot and acted closer to putty than solid ground. Izuku stopped as the suit on Gang Orca began to smolder. Surrender, Izuku commanded and pointed 2 fingers with lightning arcing at the tips. Gang Orca began to breathe at the heat and tried to pour the water he had on his head, but it evaporated before it could touch his skin. He felt his durable skin begin to burn, and his heat-resistant suit began to burn. I surrender. His voice was rough from being severely dried out. Izuku immediately stopped his release of thermal energy and began to absorb it back quickly. The ground around him solidified, and the air cooled drastically. Gang Orca let out a sigh of relief and slumped to his backside. The facility quickly became colder as Izuku kept stretching out to absorb small amounts of thermal energy from the whole area, instead of making it a frozen winter wonderland that spread. So, I guess I should have gotten something to tie you up with until the police came to get you, Izuku said awkwardly to Gang Orca on the ground. Not a bad idea to add to your equipment, but I doubt anything would survive your power. Gang Orca chuckled, and Izuku nodded at the statement. That's not all you had stored in you, was it? Izuku shook his head. No, only a fraction. He didn't mention how small of a fraction. The speakers announced the end of the exam after they found the last civilian. Izuku gave a wave to Gang Orca and headed off to change and see his results. On his way to pick up his jacket, Todoroki had been able to sit up, and the other boy was staring at Izuku like he was a monster. Izuku picked his jacket up and dusted it off before holding his hand out to Todoroki to help him up. He nodded and stood up with his help, and then turned to the other boy and did the same Izuku did for him. The other boy looked at the hand and then at Todoroki. He took it with a wary smile, and they made their way to the locker room. Yo, Flux, did you create a miniature sun? It was burning over here. Denki had his jacket off as well, and some lingering sweat was on his brow. Toru skipped forward and took Izuku's jacket before putting it on. It did get really hot. What happened? He melted the ground and made Gang Orca surrender. The tall boy said in contemplation. Ah, just like All Might then. Mina asked. All Might? The boy asked. Nah, I like Gang Orca. The most he got was first-degree burns. Izuku shrugged. All over his body. Most likely, Todoroki muttered. Everyone that passed the second phase stood waiting to see their results of the exams. Many were anxious to see their name on the screen saying they passed and would receive a provision license. Toru stood next to Izuku wringing her hands and had a scrunched-up face in worry. Izuku set his hand on hers to calm her down and smiled reassuring to her. A few moments later, the screen lit up and everyone had their focus on it. There were many cries of joy and some cries of disappointment. Izuku found his name and felt the weight fall off his shoulders. He had passed, and so had everyone in his gang of friends. Toru leapt for joy and threw her arms around Izuku's neck. He caught her and held her tight. Most of his class had also passed, except for Todoroki. Bakugo had also passed, but it was by a close margin, 1 point lower, and he would have failed like Todoroki. When everyone had calmed down, they went through the process to get their licenses and then board the bus to head back to the dorms. The atmosphere in the bus was at a high because of the success of everyone. They gave some apologies to Todoroki, but he didn't seem to mind it as much. I made a mistake during the exam, and it caused me to fail. I will do better next time, Todoroki said with conviction. What happened? It was that tall bald guy, wasn't it? Mina asked. He nodded. He took the UA recommendation exam, but chose Shiketsu High School instead. He said I had the same expression my father had, and didn't much like the man either, and he grouped me up with him. He explained. Your father isn't but. Izuku nodded. Todoroki gave the faintest of smiles. You only went to my father's agency for energy, didn't you? Used him like a battery, a good battery. He sighed in remembrance. The gang snickered at their leader using the now #1 hero as a fuel source. The rest of the trip back to the dorms was quiet enough. The class had dinner together and relaxed in the common room. Izuku pulled out a book he had been reading and let Toru snuggle under his arm while watching TV like the majority of the class was. Izuku caught the eye of Yaoruzo trying to see what he was reading. He moved the back for her to see, and her eyes gleamed. Midoriya, would you be open for me to borrow that once you were done? I have a collection you might like in return. Yaoruzo asked with hope. Izuku smiled and nodded. All right, I have a few as well. The class subtly turned their attention back to the TV and rested for the rest of the dimming light. There were croaks from Tu in contentment as she soaked in the thermal energy Izuku emitted for both Toru and himself. She hadn't spoken to Izuku, but everything she had seen of him was good. He was only hard on those he didn't like. Tokoyami was in the same boat as Tu and enjoyed Izuku's company, but the group of friends was too rowdy for his tastes. The rest of the class also began to have an understanding of the powerful boy and his attitude to many things. All except for two, Bakugo and Ida. Ida still had negative feelings toward the green-haired boy for stopping what he had planned, and to a much lesser extent Todoroki. Bakugo had been going to mandatory therapy to fulfill a condition to be allowed to join UA. He had his mindset changed a lot, and didn't know what to do with the boy he had tortured for over a decade. Kirishima was reluctant to stay by his side, but stuck with him when he saw Bakugo was trying to change. Kirishima nudged Bakugo to go, and the blonde gritted his teeth. He walked over to Izuku. Can we talk in private? Everyone's eyes were on him, except Izuku's. No, the green-haired boy said simply. His gang of friends looked back at Bakugo after Izuku's answer. They were very familiar with what kind of relationship the two had, and they didn't like the blonde at all. Kirishima winced at the wall Izuku had thrown up as Bakugo tried to make progress. Bakugo clenched his fists even more tightly and asked again. It's important, please? He gritted out. Izuku stopped reading and looked at the red eyes of his tormentor. He stared with cold eyes in return and spoke. No. He turned back to his book. I want nothing to do with you. I wanted you out of my life, but you came back and I can't do anything about it, yet. Bakugo looked down and his face flushed red. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt you for so long. I'm sorry for what I did, he said with his head bowed. Izuku looked up from his book again to glare at the blonde. You know I will never forgive or forget what you had done. So why are you apologizing? Bro, he's quiet. He turned on Kirishima, and he shrunk under the intense glare. I want nothing to do with you. Izuku stood to leave. Bakugo yelled after him. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know it was wrong. I wish I never listened to the teacher's words. Izuku stopped and turned back. He gave Bakugo a pitying look. Do you know who the lawyers that red-taped your file work for? Bakugo furrowed his brow at the change of subject and shook his head. What do you think is going to happen when you graduate? You will be owned by whoever they work for. Going back to step one and listening to others telling you it's okay to do what you want. What? What are you talking about? Bakugo growled in confusion. You think they did it out of the kindness of their hearts? No, whoever they are, wanted a tool with a powerful quirk under their leash. After all, you owe them everything. He left Bakugo with a pale face and a cold sweat dripping down his neck. Izuku woke up with a weight on his bed that he wasn't expecting. He looked down and saw Toru curled against his chest. He furrowed his brows and looked at the closed and locked door. He was trying to understand how she got inside as Toru stirred awake. She looked up at Izuku's raised brow. Toru giggled and buried her face in his chest. Well, it's nice to see you. How did you get in? Izuku said, hugging her. Teamwork, she said, muffled. She looked up. I stole your key. Hanta made a tape outline, and Kyo asked for Yayamomo to make a copy for a favor. She beamed. You thief, he said warmly and held her tight. He remembered that they had school soon and groaned softly. She understood and snuggled in as deep as she could in his warmth. Izuku got up, and so did Toru. She turned to him and gave him a peck on the lips before heading to her room to get ready. After a rushed breakfast, the whole class shared one large kitchen. Everyone was seated at their desks waiting for Aizawa to show up. A few minutes later, after the bell had rung, he arrived and stood behind the podium. Good, you are all here. He drawled out. On time. Unlike some, Izuku muttered, but Kyuka caught it and held in a snort using all her willpower. As you know, the reason for the Provision Hero license most of you have is for you to be able to use your quirks in an emergency to help in a situation. This also gives you the ability to intern with a hero, similar to earlier in the year, but more in-depth work. He motioned to the door, and 3 upperclassmen men walked in. These 3 are UA's big 3. the strongest and most likely to reach the top ranks when they graduate. They introduced themselves to the class with Tamaki failing and having Mirio do it for him with a chipper attitude. Nijire buzzed around the room asking questions and being curious about everything she sees, like a child. The class was very unconvinced that they were the top-ranking students. Mirio took the doubt in stride and proposed a spar. Most of the class was offended by his disregard for the class. Aizawa shrugged and motioned everyone to head to the gym. Everyone in Class 1A was changed into their gym uniforms and stood together against Mirio across the field from them. Todoroki was to the side, not wanting to participate since he didn't have a license. Physical attacks won't work on him, Izuku said to the whole class as he stared at Mirio, beaming a smile at them. Oh, SHD, Mina said excitedly. You've been profiled. She pointed at Mirio, who looked confused. Izuku stepped forward and began. You can sink into solid materials and shoot out of them as if you were being launched. It's not indefinite. My guess is you still have to breathe and you can't see when you use your quirk, can you? Mirio's smile fell and he looked surprised. You're just like Sir. Right. I forgot you were an intern for Sir Naitai. He was nice when I met him. A fan, huh? He is pretty great. How'd you meet him? Mirio had his smile again. When I sold all my All Might merch to him a year ago. That was you? He was extremely happy, but why? He asked curiously. Because I didn't like to have the face of the man who told me to give up trying to be a hero all over my room, Izuku said coldly. Mirio's smile fell completely away and a look of denial arose. All Might. He would never do such a thing, he said defensively. He didn't think a quirkless kid could become a hero and left me without any other encouragement other than be realistic. He watched Mirio's face crumple. But what does it matter? We're here to fight, so fight me. Izuku shrugged and waited for the first move. Mirio looked between everyone at the information the young man had just let out. From the looks of the green-haired boy's friends, he wasn't lying. His friends gave Mirio sympathetic looks. He turned back and focused on what was before him for the time being. He could ask the #1 hero who gave him his legacy about it later. All right then, here we go. Mirio charged forward with a cracked smile. Izuku didn't move and let Mirio come to him. Just as he had said, Mirio sunk into the ground and shed his clothes as he did so. In an instant, almost his whole class was down. Hyuka and Toru tried to use their quirks on him, but it had minimal effects. While he didn't like seeing Toru and his friends laying in pain, he knew it was a training exercise. But what caught his attention was the immense speed and strength Mirio had displayed that he had never shown before. Izuku was the last one standing as he stared at his friends miming on the ground. Denki gave him a thumbs up, and he calmed just a bit more. He sensed the thermal signature rise from the ground rapidly in his direction. He finally turned his head to meet eyes with Mirio as his fist was extended and gently placed against his stomach. You're stronger and faster. Something isn't right. Izuku shook his head and was more sure of himself as Mirio's eyes widened just a hair. Mirio quickly sank back into the ground and struck at his back, but the same thing happened. His fist came to a dead stop, and Izuku turned to meet his eyes. The kinetic impact launched Mirio back into the ground, and he sunk into it. He arose from a few feet away. It seems we are at an impasse. You can't hurt me, and I can't hurt you, Mirio said with everything from the waist up showing. He heard a bark of laughter from behind Izuku, and saw a few snickering. You're partially right, you can't hurt me. A lightning bolt struck at him, and he quickly sunk into the earth. Mirio tried again at striking at his exposed back, but nothing came of it. He felt an immense heat wave, and he felt his hand burn. He cried in pain and sked in a breath. It was a mistake as his lungs burned as well. He sunk into the ground to get away. He felt the ground begin to heat up and got away from the area to a cooler place. Izuku searched between thermal and electric to sense where Mirio had gone since using his thermal sense was useless as the ground heated up. He watched Mirio rise from the ground on the other side of the gym, gasping in air and coughing harshly. Do you surrender? Izuku asked as he asked many others. Mirio smiled at the challenge and sunk back into the ground to attack. Izuku shrugged and released even more thermal energy into the immediate vicinity, causing the ground to melt and the air to boil. His clothes burned away, leaving him in his black quirk clothes. Mirio was about to rise under Izuku to push him off his feet, but sunk again at coming close to the molten concrete. Mirio rose from a distance and witnessed the globe of pure heat as Izuku stood in the center of it. I can't do much, huh? I would think this is a tie since you can't catch me. Mirio called out. Sure, you can call it a tie. The heat disappeared, and the molten concrete solidified under Izuku's feet. It was cracked and uneven. Can we fight? Nijire called out and flew closer with her quirk. Izuku sensed the new energy and absorbed it from under her feet. She lost her propulsion and crashed into the ground. She sat up in confusion and flew up again. She looked around to see what had happened. She saw Mirio and Tamaki staring behind her and turned to see Izuku observing the energy her quirk produced. She felt an innate fear of seeing her power in someone else's hands. What is your quirk? Where does this energy come from? Izuku asked, not taking his eyes off the glowing spiral in his palm. When she didn't respond, he turned to her. Nijire? Huh. Oh, it's my vitality, and my quirk converts it to that, she said softly. Izuku grunted in dissatisfaction. Then, it's not useful to me. He aimed his palm into the ground and shot a bit of the energy to experiment. It was slow and made a small divot in the ground. I can't control it either, definitely unusable for me. Her quirk isn't useless, Mirio said harshly to Izuku. Izuku turned to him and furrowed his brows. Of course it isn't. No quirk is truly useless. I said it was useless to me. I can't control the spiral, and I would need her as a source. It's unrealistic for me to use this ever in the future. For her, well, she's the top 3, isn't she? He shook his head. Mirio deflated at the misunderstanding. Sorry. As for you, something is different from what I have seen during last year's festival and now. Izuku eyed Mirio, shifting uncomfortably. My quirk evolved. He lied. That's a lie. If it did, you wouldn't say it like that. Everything you have been was enthusiastic and happy, but tell me your quirk evolved with that tone isn't right. Izuku eyed him. You are very like him. Mirio chuckled uncomfortably. Then I can't say, he said with a clenched jaw. Izuku hummed non-committally and turned to greet his friends. He smiled warmly as Denki and Mina reenacted the fight badly. Why didn't you use your mist? He asked Mina. She stopped and blushed purple. I panicked and was too slow. She looked away sheepishly. Tamaki finally got close to the group. With his eyes downcast, he gave a paper to Izuku. From Fat Gum, he said quietly, and turned away. Izuku didn't ask him anything more since he was sure Tamaki would clam up even more than he was at the moment. He opened the slip of paper to see an invitation to his agency as an intern. He closed his eyes and recalled what he had on Fat Gum in his profiles. The man was a good hero with a great attitude, a protective streak, and a quirk that suited his personality very well. He let the invitation go, and Toru snatched it to read it. When should I go? Izuku asked no one in particular. Tomorrow, after school, Tamaki said quietly and walked away. Izuku was sure he would either have to go find him or Tamaki would be waiting outside his classroom door. He shrugged and made to leave with his friends. Mirio and Nijire stared after him and the scars covering his shoulders and what was revealed on his back. Mirio clenched his singed hand and thought about what he had said about All Might. I need to go talk to him. Izuku hugged Toru goodbye and waved to his friends as he walked out to the front gate. He found Tamaki walking in the same direction and met up with him halfway there. The upperclassmen looked up briefly to make sure it was Izuku, and then turned their eyes lower. The Absorber had looked up his profile from the past year and rewatched the third-year sports festival so he could get a grasp of what kind of person Tamaki was. While having a powerful quirk with the ability to use it masterfully, the older boy had borderline crippling anxiety. It was exemplified by the way the third year's shoulders slouched and his eyes didn't stray far from the ground in front of him. Would you be more comfortable if I stayed quiet, or can I ask questions? Izuku probed. Tamaki was quiet for such a long moment that Izuku thought he chose the former. What do you want to know? He said 5 minutes later. Why did Fat Gum invite me? They got closer to the train station. Tamaki looked up again to see what Izuku's face was showing. He took the look of curiosity as a front for Izuku mocking him and looked down again. He is probably interested in replacing me with you, he said morosely. Izuku's eyebrows shot up at his words and then furrowed. I doubt that. You are a very capable student and soon be a hero. Even if you have your disadvantages, from what I've seen, you are very good. Tamaki looked away from the perceived taunting. He just wants someone without my disadvantages, he said even more morosely. Everyone has disadvantages. No one is perfect. Not even your sunshine child of a friend, and especially not me. Tamaki hummed at that, and turned back to see where his steps would land. Izuku guessed that's all the boy had in him for the time being. He stayed quiet for his benefit and followed Tamaki into a train headed to Fat Gum's agency. On the trip, he recalled the information he had on Fat Gum. Everything he had read and researched about the hero said that he was a good man and a good hero. While not ranked too high, he is capable of his job as a hero. He could see the connection between Izuku's quirk and Fat Gum's, as they both could absorb kinetic strikes. Fat Gum used his fat to absorb them and redirect it as a powerful strike at the cost of his body fat. The train stopped and Tamaki began to move out, and Izuku followed. It wasn't long before they arrived at a building. The older boy walked in and held the door for Izuku. There was a loud voice that came immediately after Tamaki walked in. "Sun Eater, great to see you again, and you've brought Midoriya." Fat Gum walked up to them with a beaming smile. Tamaki shrunk into himself slightly, and Izuku frowned at that. He turned to the extra-large hero. "He thinks you're going to replace him with me." The hero's smile fell and looked at Tamaki. "That isn't true, lad. I would never do such a thing," he said softer and held the older boy by the shoulders to face him. "You are one of a kind." He smiled more fatherly to him. Tamaki looked up at the smiling face of his mentor and faintly smiled as well before looking away with reddened ears. "I'm sure there are others just like me." Fat Gum ruffled his hair roughly. "None of that. You are one of a kind." Saying any different would be a lie. Izuku did what he did to see what kind of man Fat Gum was behind closed doors, and he didn't like how Tamaki kept putting himself down. Izuku could see Tamaki as himself if his determination and conviction weren't as strong as they had been. The hero turned to Izuku and gave him a thankful nod. "Come on, let's sit down for a chat. Hope you're hungry." He led them with a smile. Tamaki walked beside Izuku and said softly, "Thanks." Izuku nodded with a hum. Instead of the office he was expecting, Fat Gum led the two students to a cafeteria. The hero sat down after grabbing a large plate of food in each hand and motioning Izuku do the same. They finished their food and Fat Gum hummed in pleasure. He clapped his hands and leaned forward, looking at Izuku. "So what do you say? Want to be my intern?" he said with a smile. "Not with more information." Izuku shook his head. "Fair enough. What do you want to know? Why are you inviting me?" He hummed in thought. "Because I've read the report about you during your internship with the Endeavor Agency. During your patrol with Burnin, when that villain tried to use you and a civilian as a hostage with his quirk, what did you do? Pulled the woman away from the crowd and drained the energy from the bomb on her, and then me." He snapped his fingers and pointed at him. "Exactly. You ensured both minimizing damage and the safety of the woman. I like that. Also, your quirk fits in well with my theme. He turns into what he eats, and you take any blows without stopping." He pointed at the two students. Izuku took that in and nodded. "What do you think of quirkless people?" His smile faded. "They're people like you and me, only missing a tool that most people are born with." He looked a bit sad as he spoke and asked, "Why do you ask?" Izuku watched the man's every feature as he spoke. "I'm a late bloomer. I only got my quirk a year ago. Before that, I was belittled and beaten by almost everyone in my previous school. Teachers docked my grades, police would ignore me, hospitals wouldn't take me, and my peers used their quirks on me. What I'm asking is, what do you think of me?" he said with a flat voice. The man's face saddened even more as he listened and grew angry before the end. "What school did you go to?" he asked, almost standing up. "Aldera." The hero furrowed his brows at the name. "Where have I heard that name before?" His eyes snapped to Izuku again. That was the school that was raided. Everyone was investigated and all of the staff was sent to the slammer. It was ugly from what I've read. I made sure of it. I gave enough evidence to police and news stations that they didn't have any other options," he said wistfully in remembrance of that wonderful day. "You never answered my question. What do you think of me?" The hero rounded the table and knelt before the seated student. "Whether you have a quirk or not, you're still you. With that mind of yours, you would have been a hero nonetheless." He patted Izuku's shoulder. Izuku's eyes softened and he almost began to tear up. He looked away and cleared his throat. "That's good to hear. At least you weren't alone, right? You had your parents?" The hero tried to reassure the boy. Izuku sighed and shook his head. "My mother abandoned me long ago, and I've never met my father. I was on my own for." That's all he got out as Fat Gum yanked him into a hug. The hero sobbed and fat tears rolled down his face as he squished Izuku into his body. "You went through so much," he practically yelled. Izuku couldn't respond as he was beginning to suffocate with his face pressed against the man's pliable chest. Even as his oxygen ran out, it felt nice to be embraced by the man. When he couldn't hold it anymore, he zapped the man lightly to let him go. He took in a lung full of air immediately after being released. He was grabbed by the shoulders again and made to face the hero. "If you ever need help, I'll gladly do what I can," he said seriously with tear stains on his face. Izuku felt himself relax. He smiled and nodded. "Thank you, Fat Gum. That means a lot." He was the first adult to offer any help, and Izuku was grateful. After a bit of time to calm down, Fat Gum spoke again. "Would you like some time to think about my offer?" "No need, I'll join." Izuku smiled at the large man. He threw his hands into the air in celebration. "Wonderful. This means a feast." Tamaki finally moved from his awkward position at the table. He listened to everything Izuku had said and was also saddened by what he said. They had food brought to the table, and they ate a bit more. Fat Gum was happy to have a new intern and the feast before him. Fat Gum led Izuku to the office while Tamaki went off to change for the day. The hero signed what he needed for Izuku and handed it off to him. He explained to Izuku what he would most likely be doing while under his care. For the most part, Izuku would tag along with either Sun Eater, Fat Gum, or both. They finished up what they needed, and they parted ways until the next day. Izuku made his way back to the dorms with his paperwork. "Izuku, how'd it go?" Toru was the first to greet him as he walked through the dorm's doors. "Pretty good." Izuku smiled back. "Yo," Denki and Kyuka said at the same time as they battled in the game. Mina shuffled to the side to let Izuku sit next to Toru. He took the seat gratefully and let out a sigh of relief. "Everything okay?" Mina asked. Izuku looked confused why she would be asking. "Yeah, why?" "That sigh didn't sound all right," Toru added. "That's just a guy thing. I think it starts like that and evolves more and more," Denki said, not looking away from the screen. Sato, who was intently watching the match on the screen, added, "Oh, kinda like when Dad gets up with a grunt, even though he could bench all of us put together." "Careful, Izuku. The leading cause of children is premarital hand-holding." Then boom. "You're a dad making dad noises," Mina teased. There were scattered chuckles in the common room at her words. Izuku was lost in thought as he imagined him being a father. He was brought out of his thoughts by Toru staring at him intently. She quickly looked away with heat on her face, but she didn't let go of his arm. Later in the night, Izuku was at his desk working on his Quirk notebook when he heard a knock at his door. He got up and opened it to see a set of floating clothes. Just as he was going to turn his thermal sense on, Toru slipped under his arm and dove under his bed covers. Izuku's brow creased in both amusement and question. He walked over to his bed and the still person under his covers. He tugged on the covers, and Toru held tight and pulled back. Her face peeked out and stuck her tongue out at him. "Get your own. Those are my own." Izuku chuckled. "Then come and take them from me," she said, covering her head again. Izuku was about to try and tug on the covers again and stopped. "Toru, do you want to sleep in the same bed?" His face burned slightly at the realization of why she would barge into his room late at night. "Do you not want to?" she asked with her voice muffled by the blankets. Izuku remembered the first night at the dorms and the sleepover they had. "I don't mind," he said softly. The bed covers were opened up by Toru. She was sporting a light blush with a soft smile. Izuku crawled into the bed with her. He shuffled around and settled. Immediately, Toru took one arm and put it around her, and she shuffled under his arm. She smiled shyly at him and leaned up to peck his lips. "Good night," she said. Izuku had to clear his throat twice before speaking properly. "Night, Toru." The next day, Izuku headed back to Fat Gum's agency for his first day. Sun Eater was already there and gave him a nod in greeting. Izuku changed into his hero suit and went to meet up with the hero. Fat Gum greeted the two students happily and showed them their routes for the day. Izuku would tag along with Sun Eater for the day. They made their way out and began the day. "Anything I should keep an eye out for that you've noticed in the area?" Izuku asked. Sun Eater hummed in thought and shook his head. "Just the normal stuff." "Also, what's your code name?" "Flux." He put on his half mask. Sun Eater nodded, and they began to walk down the sidewalk. Sun Eater was recognized by some civilians waving at him as he passed by. Izuku introduced himself when they asked, and they continued with little trouble. For 2 days, Izuku and Tamaki patrolled the area with small-time criminals popping up randomly. On the third day, the two students joined Fat Gum on his patrol of the city. So what do you think of your future so far? Fat Gum asked around a mouthful of food. It's what I expected, and I'm pretty happy with it, Flux said while looking around. That's great to hear. Here, have a bite. Fat Gum tossed a snack into Izuku's hands without taking no for an answer. There was a commotion ahead of them, and two gangs were close to coming to blows when they arrived. Many tried to flee when they saw the group of heroes, but Fat Gum blocked them, and they were trapped in his body fat. The hero laughed at the ease of the capture, but one of the thugs used his quirk to escape from the hero. He didn't get far as Flux blocked him from escaping by aiming his pointer and middle fingers at him, with lightning arcing around them. He skid to a stop, and Sun Eater took that opportunity to capture him with his tentacles. Great teamwork. Fat Gum called out from a bit away. Izuku smiled under his mask at the praise and helped Sun Eater to handcuff the thug. Izuku turned when he sensed one person come out of the crowd. He shoved Sun Eater down, and the gunshot went off. Izuku absorbed the impact of the bullet and grabbed it before it fell to the ground. He was shocked to see it wasn't a bullet, but a small syringe. His eyes locked onto the shocked man's face. Gun, get down, Fat Gum shouted to everyone. Izuku aimed his hand at the gunman to shoot a lightning bolt at him, but he was in front of the crowd, and he could miss. He cursed and blocked another bullet he aimed at Tamaki. The man began to sprint away from them, and Izuku caught up to him with bursts of kinetic energy through his feet. He heard the thug say something mocking, but Izuku ignored him in favor of tackling the man and sending a shock through his body. He screamed in pain, but Izuku grabbed his hands to subdue him. A small blade extended from his wrist and slashed Izuku's hands. He cursed and let go with bleeding hands. One weakness of his quirk was that if he was slashed he could get hurt. Stabbing, on the other hand, he could absorb the impact and move away from the tip of the blade pushing into him. The man laughed and pulled something out of his coat. Flux didn't wait to see what it was and shot him with a bolt of electricity that caused him to convulse and fall limply onto the ground. The syringe he held was crushed in his hand. Fat Gum ran up to his in turn and saw the cuts on his hands. "SHD, you okay, Flux?" Fat Gum asked. Izuku briefly looked down at his bleeding hands and back at the villain to make sure he didn't move. "Probably needs stitches. You got shot, too," he pointed out. He moved to handcuff the unconscious villain and noticed the broken glass from the syringe. "What's that?" "Not sure. I didn't think it was a good idea to let him do whatever with that." He saw Sun Eater run up to them and headed for Izuku. He pulled out a small medical kit and helped Izuku slow the bleeding. The absorber took off his jacket and held his arms up to slow the bleeding. BLD dripped down his arms and to the ground. "Thanks, Sun Eater," Izuku said, sitting down on a set of stairs in the alley. "You got shot too, didn't you?" he asked and pulled his eyes away from Izuku's heavily scared shoulders. Izuku remembered the odd bullet and nodded to his jacket. "In a pocket, careful. It's not a bullet." Tamaki searched his jacket slowly and pulled out the syringe bullet that would have hit them both. "Fat Gum." He gave it to the hero after looking it over. "That doesn't look good." The hero grimaced and pulled out a small plastic bottle to put it inside. "Let's get you some help." The hero put it away and helped Izuku to the sound of sirens coming closer. Tamaki took the last villain with them and handed him off to the police. He walked over to the back of the ambulance that helped his underclassmen close the wounds on his hands. The paramedic's quirk sealed the cut little by little until it was gone. A scar was left in its place, and then he moved on to the other hand. "Thanks for stopping the bullets. What kind of upperclassman am I to let you do that?" he said self-deprecatingly. "I could take them without injury. If you took one of them, who knows what that stuff would have done to you? I guess," he said, looking down. "He's right. Some heroes work alone because they can. Others work in teams to cover their faults." Fat Gum patted Sun Eater's shoulder with a smile. "What of the bullet?" Izuku asked, wiping his arms clean of BLD. "Handed it off to the police to have it investigated and screened. Never seen anything like that." He shook his head. So, this was the end of Part 7 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.